Nothing in your life is random. What you call coincidence may be the last warning you ignored, and once you see this, you can't unsee it. Most people live believing life is chaotic, unfair, and accidental. They tell themselves that events just happen, that timing is bad luck, that patterns are coincidence. But Carl Jung challenged this belief with a dangerous idea. When meaning is ignored, it returns as fate. Think about it. How many times have the same situations repeated in your life? Different people, same outcome. How often have you felt something was off, yet moved forward anyway? That discomfort wasn't anxiety. It was awareness knocking quietly. Here's the truth. Most never hear. Life is always communicating through patterns, through repetition, through synchronicity. And when you don't listen early, life raises its voice. This video reveals how to recognize the signs before they become crises. You'll understand why coincidences feel personal, why certain events chase you, and how awareness turns fate into choice. Once you grasp this, life stops feeling random and starts feeling readable. When meaning knocks, it never kicks the door down. It taps, patiently, almost politely. Most people call that tap coincidence and move on, scrolling, rushing, numbing out. But Carl Jung warned that life doesn't waste energy on randomness the way we think. What feels accidental is often the unconscious arranging a quiet meeting. A name repeats, a book falls off a shelf, the same idea shows up twice in one day. That's not noise. That's a signal asking for awareness. Ignore it long enough, and the knock turns into a shove. Think of meaning like a radio frequency, always broadcasting, rarely tuned in. When awareness is low, everything sounds like static and chance. But as attention sharpens, patterns begin to organize themselves. Suddenly, events line up with inner questions you never said out loud. This is where synchronicity lives, right at the edge of disbelief. Jung described it as an alignment between inner state and outer reality. Not mystical, just precise in a way logic can't fully explain. Picture a man thinking about changing careers, yet doing nothing about it. Within weeks, he meets an old friend thriving in a new field. A podcast episode plays on that exact topic during his commute. Later, a job posting appears. Same company, same role he imagined. Call it luck if you want, but fate often wears a subtle disguise. Meaning doesn't force decisions, it presents mirrors. What you do next reveals how awake you really are. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Calling things coincidence is emotionally convenient. It frees a person from responsibility, from listening to intuition. Meaning demands response, while chance asks nothing at all. That's why symbols feel unsettling. They point somewhere specific. A repeated obstacle, a familiar disappointment, the same relationship dynamic. Those aren't punishments. They're directions poorly followed. Transformation begins when excuses run out. Life rarely explains itself in words. It prefers demonstration. It rearranges conversations, delays plans, introduces people at odd moments. These moments form patterns long before they form conclusions. The unconscious sets the stage quietly, waiting for recognition. Miss the lesson, and it comes back wearing a different costume. Catch it early, and you gain leverage over your own fate. And that naturally leads to the next question. Why do the same signals keep repeating? The unconscious doesn't hide to confuse. It hides in order to be noticed. It leaves clues in everyday life, right where no one thinks to look. Carl Jung believed the unconscious communicates through patterns, not speeches. That's why the message feels vague at first, almost easy to dismiss. A strange emotion without a clear cause. A recurring thought that shows up during quiet moments. These are not glitches, they're invitations to awareness. Most people imagine the unconscious as something buried deep and unreachable. In reality, it's closer than breathing, more active than memory. It shows up in habits, reactions, and emotional overreactions. Someone snaps over small things, yet stays calm during real crises. That imbalance is a clue pointing to something unresolved. Jung warned that what stays unconscious doesn't disappear, it operates autonomously. And when it runs the show, fate feels hostile instead of instructive. Think of the unconscious like a shadow following you at noon. You can't outrun it, and you can't pretend it isn't there. If ignored, it grows darker and more dramatic. That's when life starts exaggerating its signals. A minor warning becomes a major setback. A quiet discomfort turns into a loud crisis. The lesson didn't change, only the volume did. Here's something practical most people miss. Write down repetitions. Not goals, not affirmations, repetitions. Same argument, different person. Same disappointment, different context. Patterns reveal beliefs faster than introspection ever could. Jung used this method constantly with his patients. What repeats is what wants integration. The unconscious isn't your enemy, it's your unpaid advisor. It sends invoices in the form of emotion, tension, and coincidence. When ignored, the debt accumulates with interest. When noticed, clarity begins to replace confusion. Life starts to feel less random and more intentional, and just as awareness sharpens, another realization emerges. If clues keep appearing, maybe they're speaking a language you haven't learned yet. Synchronicity happens when life stops speaking around someone and starts speaking with them. Inner thoughts and outer events suddenly rhyme, not because the universe is showing off, but because alignment has occurred. Carl Jung described synchronicity as meaning without cause. No clear chain of events, yet impossible to dismiss. It feels strange because it bypasses logic and goes straight to intuition, and intuition always recognizes truth faster than reason. Alignment is not comfort, it's coherence. It's when actions, values, and inner direction point the same way. That's why synchronicity often appears during moments of decision. A person hesitates, and suddenly life responds with precision. The right conversation happens at the wrong time. A delay saves someone from a bad choice. Meaning emerges exactly where control loosens. Imagine walking against a strong current in a river. Every step is exhausting, every movement forced. Now imagine turning and floating instead. The water doesn't push anymore, it carries. Synchronicity feels like that shift. Not effortlessness, but cooperation with reality. Resistance fades when alignment begins. Here's a practical way to notice alignment. Watch your energy, not motivation, energy. Aligned actions energize even when they're difficult. Misaligned actions drain, even when they succeed. Jung believed the psyche reacts immediately to truth. Your body knows before your mind admits it. Fatigue can be a clue, not a weakness. When alignment strengthens, life grows precise, almost surgical. Meetings feel timed. Opportunities arrive without chasing. The right book appears exactly when the question matures. These moments aren't rewards, they're confirmations. They signal that inner and outer worlds are speaking the same language. But alignment raises a deeper issue. What happens when someone actively resists it? Resistance is not passive, it's active avoidance dressed as logic. What someone refuses to look at doesn't disappear, it reorganizes itself. Carl Jung warned that resistance feeds repetition. Life doesn't argue, it repeats. The same lesson returns with a different face, a louder voice. And each return feels less like chance and more like pressure. That pressure isn't punishment, it's insistence. Think of resistance like holding a beach ball underwater. It takes constant effort to keep it down. Eventually it explodes upward with force and mess. Ignored emotions behave the same way. Unaddressed fears turn into patterns of self-sabotage. Avoided conversations become recurring conflicts. What's resisted gathers energy in the dark. People often say, "Why does this always happen to me?" That question hides the real one. What am I refusing to face? The same relationship dynamic repeats, the same disappointment shows up in different jobs, the same inner frustration never quite leaves. Jung believed repetition is the psyche demanding attention. The message stays simple, the delivery gets harsher. Here's a grounded practice: track emotional spikes, not events. Where does irritation flare too quickly? Where does fear appear without proportion? Those reactions point directly to resisted material. Instead of suppressing them, observe them like data. Write what triggered it and what it reminded you of. Patterns emerge faster than explanations. Resistance keeps people busy but stagnant. Awareness feels slower, but it moves things forward. The moment resistance loosens, repetition weakens. Life no longer needs to shout the same lesson. And strangely, circumstances begin to shift without force. What once felt like fate starts feeling negotiable. That realization opens the door to a deeper question. What if life has been speaking all along? Life doesn't communicate through explanations. It communicates through arrangement. It places people, obstacles, and timing in specific sequences. Most miss the message because they're waiting for clarity instead of paying attention. Carl Jung believed meaning appears through lived experience, not instruction manuals. That's why life feels poetic before it feels logical. The message is rarely loud, but it's always consistent, and consistency is how truth gets noticed. Listening to life requires a different kind of attention, not the kind used for productivity or entertainment. It's slower, quieter, and more observant. Moments of friction often carry more information than moments of success. Delays, for example, are rarely random. They often prevent movement in the wrong direction. What feels like interference may be protection in disguise. Consider someone rushing into a business deal despite repeated red flags. The paperwork stalls. A partner backs out unexpectedly. A sudden expense drains momentum. Each event looks inconvenient in isolation. Together, they form a clear pattern. Life is whispering, not this way. A practical exercise Jung himself encouraged was reflection after disruption. Whenever plans collapse, ask one question: what is this rearranging? Not why me, but for what purpose? That shift changes the emotional tone immediately. Instead of frustration, curiosity appears. Instead of resistance, awareness grows. Listening begins when defensiveness ends. Those who listen early need fewer wake-up calls. Those who ignore signs require louder signals. Life adapts its volume to your attention level. When awareness sharpens, chaos loses its grip. Events feel guided rather than hostile. And at that point, another insight becomes unavoidable. If life is speaking, then maybe coincidence is just a word for mishearing. Calling something a coincidence often feels harmless, even rational. But underneath, it can be a quiet refuge for fear. Fear of being responsible for change. Fear of admitting that life might be responding directly. Carl Jung challenged this comfort by insisting that meaning demands courage. Because once something has meaning, neutrality disappears, and action becomes unavoidable. Chance is emotionally convenient. It allows people to observe without engaging. If it's random, no decision is required, no adjustment, no risk, no discomfort. Meaning, on the other hand, asks a question back. It says, "Now that you've noticed, what will you do?" That question exposes avoidance instantly. Imagine standing at a crossroad with a clear sign pointing left. Ignoring it doesn't erase the sign. It only guarantees a longer, more difficult route. Many people keep walking straight and call the consequences bad luck. Jung saw this as unconscious fear directing behavior, not fear of failure, but fear of transformation, because change always costs something familiar. Here's something practical. Notice where the word just appears. Just a coincidence. Just bad timing. Just the way things are. Those phrases often signal suppressed intuition. Try replacing just with curiosity for 1 week. The shift feels uncomfortable, but revealing. When coincidence loses its protective function, clarity sharpens. Events stop floating, they point. Patterns stop repeating, they evolve. Life begins to feel responsive instead of random. Fear doesn't vanish. It gets outranked by awareness. And once fear loosens its grip, another truth emerges. Meaning isn't something to fear. It's something to learn how to handle. Change rarely arrives announced. It sends symbols ahead of time. Before life shifts externally, it rearranges things internally. Carl Jung believed symbols are the psyche's advanced notice system. They show up as images, conversations, dreams, or repeated themes. Most people overlook them because they don't look practical. But symbols are not instructions. They're preparations. They soften the ground before transformation takes place. Think of symbols like weather changes before a storm. The air gets heavier. The silence feels different. Animals move before clouds appear. In the same way, the psyche senses change before events unfold. A book suddenly resonates deeply. A phrase sticks in the mind for days without explanation. Someone starts dreaming repeatedly about houses, doors, or unfamiliar rooms. Another keeps noticing clocks, deadlines, or time slipping away. These are not decorations of the mind. They're metaphors preparing consciousness for transition. Jung treated symbols as emotional maps, not puzzles to solve. Their job is not clarity, it's orientation. They point toward what's forming beneath awareness. Here's a simple practice. Treat symbols as questions, not answers. Ask, what does this reflect in my life right now? Not literally, but emotionally. A closed door may point to boundaries. A broken object may reflect exhaustion. Write the symbol down and connect it to your current tension. Insight often arrives later, quietly. When symbols are ignored, change still happens, but less gracefully. Preparation turns into shock. Transition turns into crisis. Life prefers cooperation over force. Symbols are its polite warning system. Those who learn to read them move with change instead of against it. And that raises the next realization. What happens when awareness finally catches up? Fate feels heavy only when it's invisible. When patterns remain unseen, they dictate behavior quietly. Carl Jung believed awareness was the key to liberation, not control, not force, conscious recognition. The moment a pattern is seen clearly, its power weakens. What once felt inevitable becomes optional. Awareness interrupts the autopilot of life. Think of fate, like driving on a road at night without headlights. Every turn feels sudden, every obstacle unfair. Turn the lights on and the road doesn't change. You do. Awareness doesn't remove difficulty, it removes surprise. And surprise is what makes life feel cruel. Clarity restores agency. A person who notices their patterns early can choose differently. They pause before repeating a destructive reaction. They recognize the familiar emotional pull of the wrong decision. This pause is not weakness, it's power. Jung emphasized that consciousness expands freedom. Without it, behavior repeats automatically. With it, choice enters the room. A practical exercise. Name your patterns out loud, not to judge them, just to see them. This is how I avoid conflict. This is how I abandon my intuition. Language stabilizes awareness. Once named, a pattern loses its mystery, and what loses mystery loses control. Awareness doesn't guarantee easy outcomes. It guarantees honest ones. Life becomes less dramatic, but more intentional. The same events happen, but they no longer trap you. Instead of reacting, you respond. And that shift changes the entire relationship with fate. Which leads naturally to the next insight. What happens when repetition itself changes meaning? Repetition often feels cruel, but it isn't malicious. It's instructional. Life repeats what hasn't been fully understood. Carl Jung saw repetition as the psyche's persistence, not its failure. The same situation returns because the lesson wasn't integrated, not learned intellectually, integrated emotionally. Until that happens, the loop stays open. Think of repetition like a teacher who won't move on mid-lesson, not because the student is slow, but because the concept matters. Life doesn't rush comprehension. It waits. People change cities, jobs, partners, and meet the same conflict again. Different scenery, identical tension. The environment shifts, the pattern stays. Someone keeps attracting controlling relationships. Another keeps sabotaging success at the same stage. These are not curses. They are unexamined agreements with the past. Jung believed repetition dissolves once its emotional root is seen. Awareness doesn't erase history. It renegotiates its influence. Here's a grounded approach. Stop asking why again. Ask instead, what is this trying to finish? What boundary wasn't set? What truth wasn't spoken? What fear keeps choosing familiarity over growth? Write the answer without editing it. Clarity often arrives faster than comfort. When repetition is understood, its tone changes. It loses urgency. The pattern softens, then fades. Life no longer needs to insist. What once felt like punishment reveals itself as guidance. And that realization prepares the mind for the final shift, because once repetition ends, recognition begins. Meaning is rarely discovered like a hidden object. It's recognized, the way a familiar face stands out in a crowd. Carl Jung believed truth resonates before it convinces. That's why meaningful moments feel oddly familiar. They don't shock the soul, they wake it up. Recognition carries a quiet certainty. No applause, just clarity. People search endlessly because they think meaning lives somewhere else, in a future achievement, in another relationship, in a different version of themselves. But meaning doesn't arrive new. It arrives remembered. It feels like returning to something long ignored. That's why recognition can be emotional. Think of meaning like tuning a piano. The strings were always there. They were just out of alignment. Once adjusted, harmony appears instantly. Nothing new was added. Something was corrected. Jung saw individuation as this process of inner alignment, becoming who you already are. A practical shift. Stop asking, "What should I do?" Ask instead, what feels undeniably true right now? Truth often feels simple, even inconvenient. It doesn't argue, it doesn't rush. It waits patiently for acknowledgement. Recognition begins where noise ends. Once meaning is recognized, life simplifies. Choices feel cleaner. Conflicts feel instructive, not chaotic. Events no longer feel random. They feel relevant. And when relevance replaces randomness, a quiet responsibility emerges, because seeing clearly always asks something in return. Now the responsibility shifts to you, because once you understand that coincidences don't exist, ignorance is no longer an option. Every repeated pattern, every familiar discomfort, every random delay is asking for a different response. Not fear, not control, awareness. Look at your own life for a moment. What situations keep looping? What emotions show up faster than logic can explain? What signs have you labeled as coincidence just to avoid acting on them? This knowledge isn't meant to impress you. It's meant to change you, to help you pause before repeating the same mistake, to notice alignment before forcing direction, to listen when life whispers so it doesn't have to shout. Ask yourself this and be honest. What would change if you trusted your intuition one step earlier? What decision are you postponing because calling it random feels safer? And what kind of life becomes possible when awareness replaces avoidance? If this video made you see your own patterns more clearly, don't let that clarity fade. Apply it. Observe your life this week. Track repetitions. Notice symbols. And if you want to keep learning how the mind, meaning, and awareness shape your destiny, subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and activate notifications. Here, we don't chase motivation, we build understanding. And understanding is what changes everything.